February 1945. Near Trier, Germany, winter snow blankets the bustling tactical command compound of the American Third Army. Armed sentries patrol the perimeter while busy staff officers carry operational maps between heated tents. Inside a secure briefing room, an accredited war correspondent named Edward Mason snaps photos of strategic maps. He carries immaculate press credentials from the Chicago Tribune. Everything looks perfectly normal. Then, an American investigator discovers a microscopic flaw on the journalist's expensive Leica camera. The custom lens is wrong. The detailed questions he asks are far too precise. General Patton is miles away from this room, but this single technical discrepancy will soon lead to an inescapable, mirrored trap that forces a hidden enemy to face exactly what he has done. This is the story of an elite German intelligence officer who successfully infiltrated the Third Army headquarters under a stolen identity, only to be unmasked by an American photographer who noticed a single modified lens. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We tell the compelling World War II stories that show how the right question kills the wrong cover. Master Sergeant Robert Park, 36, from Detroit, Michigan, served with the Third Army Signal Corps. Before the war, he spent 10 years chasing crime scenes and political rallies for the Detroit Free Press, learning to read a man's intentions through the tilt of a chin or the sweat on a collar. His younger brother had died at Guadalcanal, a loss that turned Park's casual photography into a cold, meticulous hunt to end the conflict as quickly as possible. Working alongside him was Major Eleanor Stone, 33, from Boston, Massachusetts, a sharp counterintelligence officer assigned to the Third Army headquarters staff. Her uncle had been lost at sea in 1942, driving her to look past polished paperwork to find the hidden cracks in human behavior. On this freezing afternoon, Stone called Park into a secure back office to examine a piece of press equipment that simply did not look right. Hauptsturmführer Friedrich Krieger, 38, was an SD intelligence officer originating from Hamburg, Germany. He believed completely that the German Reich could still secure victory through superior espionage and that American security forces were clumsy, easily blinded by official papers and a confident smile. He had spent 6 months walking through Allied territory using the identity of a dead American reporter, comfortably exploiting the loose freedom of the Western press corps. He wore a clean, tailored wool correspondent uniform and a pair of expensive, unmarked leather boots that had never seen the mud of the front lines. His primary weapon was not a pistol, but an expertly modified Leica camera that he carried slung over his shoulder, a tool he intended to use to drain the Third Army of its final, most critical operational secrets. In February 1945, the Western Allies were hammering their way deep across the German borderlands, shattering the remnants of the Western Front. The Third Army had pushed through the fortified Siegfried Line near Trier, leaving a trail of broken concrete and fractured enemy divisions. Chaos ruled the landscape. Thousands of displaced persons, retreating soldiers, and newly arrived support units clogged the muddy roads. In this massive swirling movement of men and machines, airtight military security became a logistical nightmare. Allied commanders frequently relied on standard identification badges and Supreme Headquarters passes to maintain order, operating under the assumption that no enemy agent could successfully cross the shifting battle lines with authentic Allied documentation. War correspondents held an exceptional amount of freedom during this final phase of the European conflict. They moved freely between various corps headquarters, interviewed high-ranking generals, and observed highly sensitive operational briefings to send immediate updates back to the home front. Many American officers accepted these journalists without a second glance. They let minor discrepancies in behavior or paperwork slide because they were eager for favorable coverage in the national press, or simply too exhausted by the relentless pace of the advance to cross-examine every writer. Security at administrative posts was often dangerously relaxed, focused heavily on outward physical defense rather than the quiet threat of internal espionage. A man with a camera and a confident demeanor could walk into almost any secure area unchallenged. But inside the quiet office near Trier, the casual acceptance of a visiting reporter came to a sudden halt. Major Stone sat across from the correspondent in a small, low-lit interrogation office behind the briefing room. Master Sergeant Park stood silently by the door, holding the heavy leather strap of the journalist's Leica camera. "Mr. Mason, we just need to verify a few details on your SHAF accreditation before the general's briefing," Stone said. "My papers were checked at the main gate, Major," Mason replied. "Standard procedure for the command compound, sir," Stone said. "I have been in this theater for 14 months, Mason said. "We appreciate that, but your introduction letter has a minor administrative discrepancy," Stone said. "The Chicago Tribune does not make administrative errors," Mason said. "The London bureau chief's signature looks slightly irregular," Stone said. "You are wasting my time and you are delaying a major feature article," Mason said. "I have an obligation to ensure total security here," Stone said. "Your security is an illusion maintained by bureaucratic mid-level officers," Mason said. "Please cooperate so we can finish this quickly," Stone said. "I am an accredited member of the international press," Mason said. "We also have some technical questions about your equipment," Stone said. "My camera is a standard commercial German Leica," Mason said. "Sergeant Park here says the lens assembly is non-standard," Stone said. "Your sergeant knows nothing about professional photojournalism," Mason said. "He spent 10 years shooting for the Detroit Free Press," Stone said. "That qualifies him to photograph automobile factories, not fine German optics," Mason said. "He says your film magazine is designed for high-resolution document reproduction," Stone said. "The camera belongs to me, and my methods are my own," Mason said. "The serial number belongs to a reporter killed in 1944, Stone said. "You Americans are hopelessly naive if you think a number traps a superior mind," Mason said. "Are you refusing to explain the modifications, Mr. Mason?" Stone asked. "I refuse to be cross-examined by an inferior army of mechanics and clerks," Mason said. "The uniform you wear says United States War Correspondent," Stone said. "A uniform is merely canvas for fools who require symbols to dictate their loyalty," Mason said. "Who authorized your access to our supply maps?" Stone asked. "Your own structural incompetence allowed me to see everything I needed," Mason said. "You are an officer of the Reich," Stone said. "I am Hauptsturmführer Friedrich Krieger of the Sicherheitsdienst, and your entire advance is transparent to us," Krieger said. "This is no longer a security interview," Stone said. "Then call your superiors so I can be properly processed as an officer of a superior state," Krieger said. Major Stone stood up, took the modified camera from Park, and walked out into the corridor. She knew this went far beyond standard counterintelligence procedures for a captured scout. The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton arrived within the hour. His jeep pulled up to the gate, 4 stars gleaming on his helmet and ivory revolvers visible at his belt. The general walked into the room unannounced. Every soldier froze as his cold presence filled the space. He did not raise his voice, yet the silence became total. Patton studied him. He looked at the modified Leica camera on the table, then directly into Krieger's eyes. "You wore an American press uniform inside my compound?" Patton asked. "It was a necessary tactical disguise," Krieger said. "You photographed my operational maps?" Patton asked. "I took 200 exposures of your troop movements," Krieger answered. "And you used a dead reporter's identity to steal those secrets?" Patton asked. "I used the name of a dead man who no longer required it," Krieger said. "You believe your espionage is a work of superior intellect. You think that, because you can mimic our speech and wear our cloth, you have outsmarted an entire army. You view our adherence to open press records as a fatal weakness to be exploited by your Reich. But your Reich is currently collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. The intelligence you gathered through this lens is entirely useless because your broken transport networks cannot even deliver fuel to your remaining tanks. A secret is worth nothing when you no longer have the steel to act upon it. While you spent 6 months hiding behind a stolen typewriter, Sergeant Park was using his camera to document the brutal reality of your retreating divisions. He knows every detail of a standard Leica because he earned his living through honest labor, not state-sponsored deception. His technical knowledge exposed your entire network in 5 minutes. You have 2 options. Pick one in the next 10 seconds. You will sign a full confession detailing every single contact you have established in Belgium, or you will be stripped of that uniform and hanged as a spy before the sun goes down. Either way, your deception ends today." Krieger stared at the desk, his hands trembling slightly as the cold reality of his situation settled over him. He reached for the pen and began to write. Major Stone collected the signed confession from the desk. verifying the names of the 12 hidden agents. 2 burly military policemen stepped forward to execute Patton's final order. They reached down and violently tore the American war correspondent insignia from Krieger's shoulders, leaving the fabric ragged and exposed. The uniform of his deception was stripped away in seconds. They marched him out into the center of the muddy compound, right past the offices he had spent days infiltrating. Dozens of staff officers, administrative clerks, and mechanics stopped their work to watch the disgraced officer pass. The crisp winter air smelled of truck exhaust and wet wool. Master Sergeant Park stepped directly into the path of the prisoner, raising a heavy press camera to his eye. Krieger flinched as the metallic shutter snapped, followed instantly by the bright, blinding flash of a bulb. The man who had spent 6 months using a hidden lens to steal Allied secrets was now completely exposed by an American camera. His true face was captured forever on silver nitrate, documented and neutralized before an audience of his peers. He was pushed into the back of a canvas-covered transport truck, completely ruined, and driven away toward the prisoner's stockade. Master Sergeant Robert Park returned home to Detroit in late 1945, resuming his long career at the Detroit Free Press and carrying a deep pride in his wartime service until his death in 1984. Major Eleanor Stone transitioned into the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency, where she used the technical lessons of the Trier investigation to develop foundational training protocols for uncovering enemy cover identities. Friedrich Krieger was processed as a prisoner of war and remained in American custody until his release in 1948, after which he returned to his native Hamburg. He spent 30 years working as a highly skilled peacetime photojournalist, never publicly discussing his espionage work before his death in 1991. His son later discovered declassified military files detailing the operation and published a thoughtful memoir about the complex legacy titled My Father's Other Camera in 2003. General Patton never mentioned the incident in his public briefings, preferring to keep the counterintelligence file secured inside his personal desk. In a private letter to a colleague, he noted that the Germans had perfected the appearance of their cover but failed to master the technical equipment, proving that victory belonged to the army with the specialists, who recognized exactly what the right equipment looked like. Some historians have argued that Patton's aggressive threat of immediate execution was an excessive display of command authority that deliberately bypassed the established military tribunal system. Others have argued the opposite, maintaining that this intense psychological pressure was the only effective method to break a highly trained operative and dismantle a dangerous spy ring before critical intelligence could be transmitted. What is certain is that the detailed information extracted during this single encounter provided the Allies with an unprecedented blueprint of German espionage networks, directly shaping the foundational counterintelligence protocols used throughout the early years of the Cold War. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have done the same? Or would you have handed him over to a standard military tribunal? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more stories about how the right question kills the wrong cover, make sure to subscribe.